still.
I sent it to you, didn't I? So did you eliminate the
We'll do that.
I
just.
They said no swearing at the last time.
In November, so.
I said, you know, they gave him too much caffeine before the meeting. So that one time Steve Clark called me in the office and after we finished going on and on, I said, Steve, see you later. Hey, how are you?
How are you? Good. How are you?
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
Put on an extra layer that might be perfect, realizing that it doesn't show through. But I do support Lynn, so.
Just like your
Subtle.
Superman.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah,
In
you're
the
ready.
moment. Transformation. How are you? What's going on? See you? Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Mary.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Oh, good. Nice to see you. So, been having a nice off session so far?
Yeah. So I'm writing my dissertation.
Oh, okay.
And so it's just such a cliche experience. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Cliche experiences are not necessarily bad.
No, but not necessarily a bad thing. So, eliminate.
Well, why does that my name have no well?
Yeah.
Different legislative business things.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Not a ton.
Hi, Melinda Moulton. How
Hi,
are you?
Melinda Martin.
Nice to see you.
Hi, good. Good to see you again, Deanna Gonzalez.
Good to see you again. We were just in the bed together.
Yes, we were, just right here.
Yeah, good for us.
Yeah,
It was
you're
on the
your old
paid
time.
leave.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. You know, we wish we could have gotten. We showed Dracula last Tuesday and we filled the house. I'm thinking like, why didn't they go out for paid leave? You know, isn't that a little bit more important than Dracula? Maybe not, I don't know.
No. It's almost
Hello, how are you? Good. Thanks for coming, Karen. Being part of the panel. Yeah. Thanks for being part of the panel.
Thanks, yeah. No, I'm glad we've had a number of iterations of this.
Have you been at other ones? I haven't actually been following who has been.
No, but I know that people I work with have spoken. The one is down in Westminster, Brattleboro. Middle of Vermont, my career at the resort. So we have that been going well, and then I participate as I'm working with the Burlington Energy in Vermont. So I participate every Monday in the phone calls.
Yeah.
I liked it first, and so it more comprehensively with Thank you for being here. I think it really there's a couple of key dynamics in this.
I'm still going on right now. And so it's such a funny thing of like multiple things competing for. Yeah, I've been doing that.
school board. It is. That we managed to settle up. 2 a.m. in the morning after I took off to Michigan for a week. No, not really. No, I haven't really. Awesome. I mean, I want to do some pro bono work, but I mean, travel just, I took my son to Norway. He's going to go to school he's at school this year, but I took him there.
My son went to Norway to study for 6 months, yeah.
Really, whereabouts?
I don't remember. Because, the names of the towns are mostly consonances and,
It's easy for my son because it's Oslo, so it's like that.
yeah.
It would be interesting in a book that a mentor of mine wrote, like being economics.
Yeah, I have that. I started reading it, but then I got distracted by semi-fiction, biography. The Carlsville stuff. It's like 6 books, and it's different kind of. It's like very detailed what he does every day. It's not going to sound at all good, but it was a Norwegian fiction, but it was an autobiographical like fiction. So yeah, I do have that one. It's on the reading list. I questioned my cousins a lot about what was going on with that. It might be economics.
I haven't finished it, but very interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's different. I'm not sure that well, I know lots of places in the United States could not do those things.
Well, one of the things that is really interesting is that it was all grassroots
Right.
focus, and it started like labor movements in rural and urban connections and
Give me 2 seconds and I will be.
Hello everyone, we're going to get started in just 1 minute.
Okay. I'm ready whenever you are.
Can you all hear him? Not very well, huh? Try again. Thanks.
Hello.
Might need to scream.
I'll
Great acoustics in there.
Just waiting for folks to come in from the lobby. Thank you so much for your patience. One quick speak. Karen, will you try that one? Karen, first.
Hello, hello. Yes.
Were you at
morning. My name is Johanna Miller. I'm the Energy and Climate Program Director at the Vermont Natural Resources Council. VNRC is pleased to be co-hosting a series of 6 panels across the state of Vermont with the Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility. Unfortunately, Dan Barlow, the Public Policy Manager at VDSR, who's been facilitating and moderating these conversations across the state, came down with the flu or something, and I gave him reprieve to stay home. So instead of Dan, you have me to moderate this panel, this conversation. So we wish Dan well and for speedy recovery. But as I mentioned, VNRC and VBS are paired up to host a series of conversations across the state, just to focus and deepen the conversation about the opportunities in doing something about climate. So we have a great panel here tonight who's going to share their perspective, and we definitely want to hear from you all about what you think the state of Vermont should be doing to turn the challenge of climate into an economic opportunity, a job creator, and something that lifts all boats so that our low-income friends and neighbors can participate in the clean energy transition. Before I get into and walk through the agenda and say a few more words and then turn it over to our panel, I just really want to welcome Melinda Moulton, who is our host and owner of this amazing community space. And with gratitude, Dan and I just wanted to say thank you, VNRC, VBSR, to say thank you for hosting this conversation tonight, for hosting so many important community events. But Melinda, if you don't mind just coming up and saying a few words about what you have done in terms of clean energy innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody Miller and Dan Barlow, for asking me to be here tonight. I'm actually not the owner of Main Street Landing. I'm the CEO of Main Street Landing. Lisa Steele is the owner. But Lisa Steele, and I'm going to tell you a little story about Main Street Landing. Lisa Steele and I have been pioneers in the green building movement since the mid-1980s, back in the day when the word sustainability did not exist. When we began our work redeveloping the Burlington waterfront, developers told us that the windows in our buildings could not open because of the HVAC systems. And we told them that we would develop our buildings with operable windows because we had to follow our hearts and create buildings that protected the environment and made common sense and served our social justice conscience. Over the years, we recycled our dirt, honored historic design, exceeded ASHRAE code for ventilation and fresh air by 30%. We used heat and cooling recovery to save energy. We diverted over 80% of our construction waste to recycling, and the majority of our building materials are purchased locally or within 250 miles. You will notice that our lighting is motion and daylight sensitive. Our 2 gas-fired boilers are 97% efficient. We have a cleaning policy that is entirely non-toxic, and we do not allow any VOCs into our buildings. Our building envelope, insulation, windows, HVAC, lighting, and other systems achieved a 15% better performance than other buildings designed to meet stringent ASHRAE energy regulations. We have waterless urinals in men's restrooms, and we save up to 5 gallons of water with every use. Main Street Landing is dog-friendly. We support public transit, especially rail, and we are strongly committed to the visual and performing arts. In the city's park, we created more than 18,000 square feet of new parkland for the public, and 25% of our lot coverage is devoted to vegetation and pedestrian-friendly uses, even though zoning allowed us to have 100% density. So the word sustainability is overly used today. We like to use the word adaptability because climate is changing at such a rapid rate that we cannot just sustain where we are. We have to adapt to where we are going. We all owe a debt of gratitude to the folks in Vermont who have championed the green development movement 30 years ago. And we salute the folks who are far exceeding any of our expectations in the green building movement today. Now, Main Street Landing is a member of the new Burlington BTV 2030 project, which hopes to meet a 50% reduction in energy use by the year 2030 in most buildings in the city. This building we are in has been rated, and it's received a grading that our engineers have touted. Out of all the buildings across the country, Lake and College would exceed 80% of them in energy consumption, which is considered excellent. And this building was built 12 years ago. And there are a lot of good changes going on in the green building movement we hope to incorporate over the next few years. A carbon emission study has shown that Main Street Landing's emissions resulting from facility heating and electricity purchases are 65% less than those of other office buildings operating in a similar climate when compared on a square foot basis. So, over the past 30 years, all the things that Main Street Landing has committed to, these investments, have provided a huge rate of return on our investment, which is what you're going to be talking about tonight. What's the rate of return? Well, let me tell you what ours are. Number one, we sleep very well at night. Number two, we save money for the company and our tenants. Number three, people want to be in our buildings, and we average a 99% occupancy rate. People in our buildings are healthier, and they miss less days of work because of the fresh air and green principles. Rail is returning to the back of Union Station, bringing 1,000 people a day to our city without their cars. Our tenants, they're happy and comfortable. We are conscious. We are the conscience for other developers, because our work has helped to set the standards other developers have to live by. That makes us sometimes very unpopular with other developers, but we are asked to lecture around the country on green development so we can spread our wisdom to our youth. And as women, and the first to put a shovel on the ground on the waterfront after 22 attempts by men over the last century, we feel great about our women power and our work that hopefully inspires other women to take chances and risks and embrace their potential and strength to help change our world for the better. Now finally, number 10. We know that the global temperatures will rise by another 14.5 degrees Fahrenheit if all remaining global fossil fuel resources are used. And we know that humanity is doomed. So if not us, who? If not now, then when? For the sake of our children and their children, we owe it to them to fight for their future and ensure they have a planet that they can live on in peace and prosperity. So to all of you in this room and on this panel, I thank you. My grandchildren, thank you. We will succeed. For all of humanity, we will endure. Thank you.
Thank you again, Melinda, for those good words of inspiration that demonstrate that environmental protection and environmental ethic are inextricably intertwined to a good economic viability and a strong economy and business leadership. So thank you. So let me just give you a quick rundown of our agenda, and then want to say a few words before turning it over to the formal panel. So one of the reasons that BNRC and BBSR teamed up to host these panels across the state of Vermont, well, there are several, but one of the reasons was to try to reframe the conversation and think about the kinds of solutions that we can take on in the state of Vermont and in partnership with our friends regionally and beyond to turn the challenge of climate change into something that is beneficial and supports everyone. So there's always a significant focus on the cost and the consequences of doing something about climate. We wanted to focus in on the benefits and the opportunities and really engage Vermonters in a conversation at a really pivotal moment, not only on the heels of federal administration, which has withdrawn the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement, leaving us singularly alone with war-torn Syria, but also because we have a citizen-led legislature. We have many legislators in this room that I'm going to recognize just momentarily. We also have a new Vermont Climate Action Commission that the governor, Phil Scott, has convened. I really like the term action in the commission because he's the third in a series of governors that has convened such a commission. But it is my hope as one of the 21 members of this commission that it is something where Vermonters, all of us in this room and beyond, put our shoulder behind to address and identify the kinds of solutions that are actually going to make progress on our clean energy and climate goals. And before I get into the rest of it, I wanted to just ask Mary Sullivan, our local host, to say just a couple words. Just a quick welcome.
Sure. Thanks very much, Joey. I'm Mary Sullivan. I'm a state rep from the South End Hill section of Burlington, and I'm the vice chair of the House Natural Resources Committee, and I co-chair the Climate Solutions Caucus. During the session, we meet every Thursday at lunchtime in room 10. If you're ever at the State House at that time, please come in and join us. It's usually a very vibrant discussion on how we're going to move forward. So I'd really like to thank everybody for being here. In Vermont, we have put together a lot of lofty goals, both in the statute and in the Comprehensive Energy Plan. goals don't do anything unless you have policies and plans that really go right with them to move these goals forward. So in 2006, we had a plan to greatly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 2012. We didn't meet it at all. So it's time to, I'm really happy that this panel has been convened, because it's really time to start looking at what these goals are, why they're there, they make sense, and how we actually move the agenda forward. With that,
I'm going to just take it back for a moment and just to say a few different things. So 1 in every 16 Vermonters are now employed in the clean energy economy. That's, whether they're weatherizing homes, getting solar panels on roofs or schools or businesses. That's 19,000 jobs and a nearly 30% growth since 2013. Nearly 4,000 companies in Vermont doing clean energy work. It's one of the fastest growing segments of our economy. It's creating good jobs and benefits, and it's companies usually run by Vermonters, and it wasn't by accident. The reason Vermont has 3 times the national average of clean energy work hours is because Vermonters care about their state, they're concerned about climate change, and they made their voice heard. It's because Vermont has smart business leaders that are innovating in this arena. It's because utilities in the state of Vermont, we have Christine Holquist here, our utilities have really been leaders in helping us transition. It's also because we have smart and forward-looking policymakers who stood up in support of common sense energy policies, and they've allowed Vermont to grow this sector. So in short, it's a powerful pairing of intentional good policies with business and political leadership and public support. So that's what we're, and in total, I would just have to say, if Senator Mark McDonald would here, he would remind us that all of these policies have helped to move Vermont from having some of the highest electric rates in the region to the second lowest in New England, and really grow that clean energy job sector. So that's what we want to focus in on here tonight. As you heard from Representative Sullivan, we've done a lot. We still have far more to do. We have, as I underscored before, we have a new Climate Action Commission. We have policymakers that are willing and ready to partner with us. I just want to take a moment and recognize the fact that we have Treasurer Beth Pierce here. We have some luminaries in the room. We have Senator Michael Sirotkin and Senator Tim Ash. Thank you so much for coming and listening. Representatives Squirrel and Dunn and Michael Yantasha are also here as well. And we have a fantastic panel. And the goal of tonight is to hear from this panel and hear from you all, because we're going to take the comments and the questions that you have submitted prior to this event, as well as those that you ask tonight in a facilitated question and answer session after the formal remarks from the panel. We're going to synthesize those and share those with lawmakers. We will also feed the ideas, your ideas for solutions, into the Climate Action Commission's process. So let me just turn it over to the formal panel and give you an overview of who will start the conversation, and that is Chris Miller, who's the social mission activism manager from Ben & Jerry's. And then we will hear from Karen Lafayette, who represents the Vermont Low Income Advocacy Council. Karen is also a former legislator and has spent decades working to support and protect Vermont's low income earners in a variety of ways, and has a tremendous amount of expertise in this arena. So we'll hear from Chris and Karen, and then we will hear briefly too from 3 fantastic legislators who are from this area: Representative Mary Sullivan, Representative Martin Lalonde of South Burlington, and Representative Deanna Gonzalez of Winooski. So we're really lucky to have a great panel. We're really lucky to have forward-looking policymakers, people like you, other policymakers in this audience. I feel really optimistic that we have an obligation to do something, but also significant opportunity. So let me turn it over now to Chris Miller, who can talk from the business perspective about what Ben & Jerry's has done, the value of it, and what more we can do together here in the state of Vermont. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Diana. Let me start, Stan, if I may. Let me start by thanking the NRC and also BDSR for these forums. Great opportunity, I think, for us to discuss the real opportunity, I believe, that our state has if we move aggressively to lead on climate change. I also want to thank Melinda Actually, I'm standing in for Ashley Orgain from 7th Generation, who is based here in the building. I used to work at 7th Generation. I'm now at Ben & Jerry's, which is a great place to work. The one thing I really, really miss is working in this building. So it's great to be back in the building. It's true, people want to work in this building. So let me briefly talk about a little bit about what we're doing at Ben & Jerry's to mitigate the, let's be honest, sizable impact that we have as a business. Why we think it's not enough simply to focus inside the sort of four walls of our company or on our dairy farms. Why policy is a critically important part of how we're going to solve this problem, both for our company, for our state, and for the planet. And then finally, just touch briefly on why this makes sense for companies and businesses. So the conventional wisdom that says taking action on environmental issues or on climate change somehow is counter to the interests of job creators and companies. So first, it's true, be a little counterintuitive. One might imagine that a drastically warmer world would be good for the ice cream business, but it turns out it's not. We're a food company, and we source ingredients from all around the world, and many of the ingredients we source are coming from places that are, one, both particularly vulnerable, two, have very little capacity to adapt to a warming planet, and three, are already seeing impacts from a warming planet. So, for example, we source coffee from a cooperative in Mexico, excuse me, and that cooperative has had a significant impact from a blight that impacts coffee plants. This is called roja or rust, and coffee rust typically is dealt with over the winter. As temperatures drop below freezing, it kills this blight and sort of keeps it in check over time. As temperatures have, average temperatures in this region of Mexico have risen, temperatures of course the winter have not dropped back consistently below freezing in a way that has allowed this blight to be kept in check. And therefore, this particular co-op in Huatusco, Mexico, that we work with has seen a sizable reduction in their yields. These are small-scale coffee producers. It's a cooperative, and it has a profound impact on this community, not only on our ability to make ice cream. We like to build long-term relationships with suppliers, so the point of the exercise here is not to just run around the world sourcing, coffee from wherever we can get it, but when we're doing this right, we want to build long-term relationships with communities and cooperatives that grow this stuff. It's also true in our vanilla supply chain. We've seen impacts of extreme weather that have impacted pricing on vanilla. So it's a personal issue for us, and so we really feel compelled to act. We also think that it is it's sort of touched on. It is a matter of sort of social justice. That if you look down into our supply chain and you look at the places that are most impacted, these are also communities and places that are least responsible for the mess we're in, right? And so we really believe that while everybody loves polar bears and ice caps, that we're talking about profound impacts on very vulnerable communities in places where folks are least able to sort of adapt their way out of this mess. So that's another reason we're sort of compelled to do this. I talked briefly about our footprint. It's sizable. We've done some calculations. You get about 2 pounds per greenhouse gas equivalent per pint of ice cream we produce. It is no secret that dairy farming is incredibly methane intensive, a very potent greenhouse gas. A lot of methane comes from the northwestern part of our state where we're sourcing milk and cream for our products. Our products are frozen and require refrigeration. For those of you who may be familiar with Paul Hawkins' new drawdown approach, I believe the number one action on his list is around refrigerants. So, the fact that we make stuff in St. Albans, Vermont, and we sell those pints in Christchurch, New Zealand, has a very long cold logistics supply chain. And so we have an interest in making reductions in places where we can, but there are also changes that technology has to drive that really is out of our hands, and that's the role that policy plays. So let me talk a little, just briefly, and then I'll hand it off and we have a wider discussion about the sort of benefits of taking action. So I've highlighted what are, for us, profound risks to our business. They add a level of uncertainty, and business doesn't like uncertainty. Business likes certainty so that we can plan over time. We like price stability, and we like rules. And so we believe that a rapid transition to a clean energy economy is one of the best business opportunities that the planet has ever faced. And I think most people who look at this understand that this transition is going to happen. The question is, who are going to be the winners and who are going to be the losers? Is the Vermont economy and the U.S. economy going to reap the benefits of being the first movers, or will we be surpassed by other countries? And I think that is still a question. I think the other piece of good news about this transition is, oftentimes people talk about the transition to a clean energy economy as something akin to the moonshot, right? When Kennedy announced that we're going to send, men to the moon and nobody knew how we were going to do it. The good news is, while this transition is sizable, and to be sure it will be disrupting to some, we have all the tools that we need to do this today, right? The technology exists to transition our economy to the low carbon economy of the future. We don't need to invent new innovations. We need to transition away from fossil fuels and clean renewable energy. We need to invest heavily in efficiency, and we need to transition our transportation fleet. And so the big components of how we get this done, we actually know how to do. Now we just have to create the will and policies that incent that transition. So finally, I'll just close by saying that the few things that we like about policies that transition away from fossil fuels into renewable energy standards, price on carbon, is that it does a couple of things. One, in the state of Vermont, we spend over $1 billion on gasoline alone in the state. All of that money, right? We don't have refineries and we're not pumping oil out of the ground in Vermont. All of that money leaves our economy and leaves the pocketbooks of working Vermonters and goes out of state. To the degree that we can transition away from that and towards locally produced, decentralized, renewable energy, the more dollars stay in our community, and the more dollars stay in our economy and in our state. It is also true that renewable energy is incredibly predictable. Solar panels have a 20-year lifespan. So we put a solar array at our Waterbury manufacturing plant. It produces about 30% of the energy we use there. We know the cost of the electricity that's going to come off those panels for the next 20 years, right? You don't get that with fossil fuel energy. There's a level of predictability and stability in pricing that's incredibly attractive to business. So this transition is important in that way. A decentralized system for manufacturing is also a far more resilient system. So I think we believe that these policies are incredibly important, that there are things that we can do internally to reduce the footprint of our business, but ultimately we as companies and I mean business leaders have to take our commitment to reducing the footprint of our businesses internally and line it up with advocacy for policies externally. And that's critically important. And I think we have very little time to waste. I think we sort of know the path forward. And I think we as citizens and as business leaders have to help build the political will and paint the picture of what this positive vision looks like when we move forward together. So, thank you.
Turn it over to Karen Lafayette, the Vermont Burlington Advocacy Council.
Thank you very much. The Vermont Low Income Advocacy Council has been giving a voice to poor and low income Vermonters in the area of policy and government for about 47 years now. I'd really like to thank the advocates. I'd like to thank the proponents. I'd like to thank the legislators for taking care to include us in their discussions about trying to affect climate change. There's many different constituencies. Not only are low-income people greatly affected by what's happening, climate change and energy prices and the like, but they also could stand to benefit the most. But regardless of what we do, obviously there's going to be a cost to behavior modification and to all of the other environmental things that we want to do by through carbon pricing or however we decide to do it. So we appreciate the seat at the table. I just want to give you a little synopsis of where folks that live in poverty are in the state of Vermont. 70,000 Vermonters live in poverty. Many more with low incomes struggle as well to make ends meet. Home energy costs have become an unbearable burden for many Vermont households, and the lower their income, the higher percentage of that income that they pay to stay warm. The number of folks who live in fuel poverty has climbed dramatically in the past decade and a half. 1 in 5 Vermonters is fuel poor, and that's defined as those who spend more than 10% of their monthly income on energy services. The past number of years has only made it more apparent that we need to continue with the long-term solutions to our energy needs and affordability through efficiency, especially for low-income Vermonters. Low-income Vermonters are the most affected by climate change. Vermonters with low income suffer the greatest consequences from climate events, violent storms and volatile weather, drought, flooding, loss of jobs, cold homes, lack of local food. They are often the first hit. They live in high-risk locations. They live in the most vulnerable structures. They are the slowest to recover, if they ever do able to come back from some of these catastrophic events. Economically vulnerable Vermonters face the greatest financial burden from our carbon-based economy. They are subject to price spikes in food and fuel and climate-related events. They have no capacity to financially absorb those additional costs. They often have to drive out. They often have to drive their cars a long way to get to work or to find affordable housing. So they are the most negatively impacted by the health risks that are inherent from carbon emissions, and they have limited access to health care. So low-income folks are no different than most Vermonters. They want to make their homes more comfortable. They want to save money on heating bills by weatherization. They'd like to drive higher mileage vehicles and spend less on gas. They'd like to go solar if the cost wasn't exorbitantly expensive up front. And they'd love to save money over the long term. By and large, the low-income polling that was done in the state of Vermont shows that low-income Vermonters support renewable energy sources. In fact, those with the lowest incomes in the state of Vermont support Vermont's comprehensive energy plan. A 2016 report from Efficiency Vermont, Mapping Total Energy Burden in Vermont, suggests that Vermont leads the nation in energy efficiency, but we aren't doing any better than any other states in helping low-income households lighten their disproportionate energy burden. Residents of the poorest communities are paying more than a quarter of their total income on energy, while residents in our richest communities are paying less than 5%. So how do we get to a clean energy future, reduce carbon emissions, boost the economy, improve the health and well-being of all Vermonters, and pay for it, without increasing the burden on our most vulnerable citizens? First and foremost, I think the plan needs to fit the state of Vermont, one that plays to our strengths and benefits all and does not overburden the few. Bill Lake has worked on the legislation to ensure that low-income folks will not only benefit from a cleaner energy future, but that the increased cost burden will not fall on them disproportionately. To the extent that we can draft a plan that works in our economy, the better off we will be. The proponents of carbon pricing are committed to addressing the needs of low-income Vermonters' concerns. I think just in general terms, there's been many ideas floated out there. The more sophisticated the plan can be, the better. The first and obvious way to mitigate the cost to low-income Vermonters would have been to exempt them from the additional tax. But we want to play a role in that future. That reduces the revenues, that would reduce the revenues, and to achieve the specific goals, and doesn't support the transition from the use of carbon fuels. So we want to be part of that. The intent is to save Vermonters money, grow Vermont's economy, and create jobs by keeping more of our energy dollars local, to substantially reduce Vermonters' carbon pollution, and ensure that all Vermonters, including working families, low-income Vermonters, and those living on fixed income, benefit from a cleaner energy future. What we'd like to see is targeted benefits, additional benefits for low-income, graduated benefits, higher for those at the lower end of the federal poverty level, and gradually reducing as the income goes up. Those benefits should be reflective of income, and we should be mindful of the benefit cliff. Even though we have levels of 100% of the federal poverty level or 200%, and we assist people with benefits to somewhere around 185%, that often doesn't really tell the real story. People that live at 200% of the federal poverty level are still living in poverty in many cases. Benefits should be reflective, to the extent possible, of actual consumption. For example, there's one of the things that we've been concerned about is the difference in increased heating and transportation costs. So that we recognize the differences that a family driving 2 cars, an old clunker to work, 60, 70 miles, has to pay more in transportation costs than someone who's just paying an additional increase in their heating costs. So that's something that really has to be finessed. Whatever the plan is, it needs to be well understood and easily accessible. The delivery of the benefits needs to be easily accessible. And we can talk about whether or not it goes to households or individuals, whether there's a monthly benefit, whether we put some money on an electronic benefit card, whether it's an income tax refundable credit, a direct rebate to a bank account, which would help elders. And we want to think of the details because it makes a real difference, like exempting the rebate or the benefit from being counted against other assistance programs. We happen to like the idea of using some of the dividends for additional benefits to climate change initiatives and low-income benefits. I know that most of the plans that have been floated outside of the first iteration were what they consider revenue neutral. But we like the idea of using some of those revenues on projects like public transportation. That's the #1 cost for low-income people and the biggest barrier to employment. Cash for clunkers, low-income weatherization. We would even like to consider using some of those revenues to fund LIHEAP benefits. In this state, we actually pay for LIHEAP benefits for people over 150% of the federal poverty level because the federal government decided not to do that. And we do that by swapping out some low-income weatherization money, which is state dollars because we raise that ourselves, and putting that into LIHEAP and then taking the LIHEAP money that can be used for weatherization and using that. But that's $2.8 million that could be used for more weatherization projects and still maintain the LIHEAP benefit for those over 150% of the federal poverty level. switching to more efficient heating elements like heat pumps for people, having a program to pay for that. Low-income weatherization, doing 10,000 more households in a decade and reducing those energy burdens. That would benefit all of us. The point being is that no matter how you choose to implement carbon pricing and some kind of economic plan, it can accommodate low-income concerns. In 2015, when the carbon tax proposals were introduced, we worked with the proponents to come up with a plan that worked for low-income folks. In 2016, we worked alongside community action agencies to move a gross receipts tax on fuel oil to a per gallon, the first carbon tax, and raised a tax that hadn't been raised in 25 years, so it can be done. And that partially funds the low-income weatherization program. There were a number of options floated last year that were brought forth to begin the discussion of how we might be able to achieve that. And I know that there's more in the works. We're at the table, we're sitting down, we're rolling up our sleeves, and we believe that we can achieve this all together and believe that, and are grateful that low-income people will be considered, and truly they'll be part of a cleaner energy future.
Thank you, Karen. I'll turn it over. So Karen went deep into the carbon pricing. I'll turn it over to Representative Sullivan, who can talk about sort of, again, one of our goals from this forum is to showcase not only the really more powerful policies, but also get ideas from this panelist, but from you all as well about the kinds of solutions the state of Vermont could be advancing, and thread those into the legislative process and thread them into the Climate Action Commission's work. So turning over to Representative Sullivan to talk a little bit about what she sees on the radar and any other thoughts you have.
The one thought that I really like to talk with groups about is, I'll start by saying, in the previous biennium, David Dean and I introduced a carbon pricing bill. Chris Pearson was the lead sponsor of the other carbon pricing bill. We tried to get the discussion going, and because I serve on the House Natural Resources Committee, the discussion was going in my committee for the most part. As we would be sitting there talking, I could see the fossil fuel lobbyist sitting there kind of sending out his tweets or sending out his emails or whatever. I'd walk out the door at lunchtime and all these legislators would be like, what are you doing in your committee? I just got a call from all of our fossil fuel dealers telling me to back off, stay away, don't do this. It is so important. Please don't think just because you've signed a petition that that's enough. Good, sign a petition, please, but I've heard legislators say, oh, I got a name on these petitions, I don't even think the people read it. You really need to pick up the phone, call legislators, call us at home, that's perfectly fine. I get some irate constituents calling me at home. They have to listen when you're on the phone. Try to, get them in the grocery store, go down to the State House, talk to people, send emails if you're just not totally comfortable with picking up the phone. But it is so important to fight back, because let me tell you, those lobbyists that are inside the building who represent these businesses are doing a really good job for these businesses. So whatever you can do to be that force on the outside is so, so important. So we do, I'm finding a lot of people who talk about the cost and not about the benefit. We've got to get back to where we're really looking at investments. This is an investment in our future. We have some people who make that silly thing like, oh, if Vermont cut out all their greenhouse gas emissions, would that save the day? Of course it wouldn't, but let me tell you, it would really put us in a place where we'd be moving forward. Not only would our economy be stronger and we'd be creating a lot of green jobs, good jobs that would keep young people in the state, but there are now studies that show that as much as when you reduce fossil fuel use, people are healthier, we're reducing asthma rates, we're reducing lost work hours. There's so many things that will really move us forward. So I think we all know that we're moving away from the fossil fuel age. And do we want to lead this transition in a really methodical way where we do it for our benefit, for the benefit of our economy and our people? Or do we want to, be lagging behind as it kind of, we try to catch up? So I'm really hoping that we move forward in the first way where we're really leading the charge and going forward. And carbon pricing is such an important part of this. It's really, if you think with a little vision and whatever, you can understand the benefits of carbon pricing. They do it in so many places around the planet. Everywhere where they've done it, fossil fuel has gone down, the economy has picked up, dollars remain local, it's good all around, and people are healthier. So there's kind of not really anything that is bad about it. But when you only think about the cost and you only talk about, oh, it's a tax rather than the benefit, and also the fact that they always leave off the fact that a lot of this money will be going back in the form of other cuts that people will be seeing. They just have to, the people who actually really reduce their energy use will come out benefiting from this. So we definitely need your help in moving this agenda forward, and I really want to thank you again for being here.
Is this working now? All right, excellent. I have the pleasure of talking a little bit of more wonkish and technical side of carbon pricing and what we're trying to do. So there are many policies that can be implemented and are being implemented to address climate change. And I'll just mention a few. Energy efficiency standards for appliances and for buildings, land use management regulations that call for more dense development and fewer miles driven, funding weatherization programs, incentivizing the development of solar power through, for example, net metering, incentivizing the purchase of electric vehicles, ensuring there are sufficient charging stations for those electric vehicles. These are all different policies that the legislature and local communities have implemented, or variations of some of them have been implemented. But what has been missing and should be part of the portfolio of these policy solutions is putting a price on carbon. Now, putting a price on carbon is really an ideal way to change behavior related to the use of greenhouse gases. And I'm going to get into just a little bit of high-level economics to explain the concept. I'll throw out the term which many folks know, externalities, but let me explain it in a much more simplified way. So when people engage in activities that release carbon, they impose costs on others. For example, when someone drives a car, it burns gasoline, it contributes to global warming, and it imposes costs on the public. That societal cost is not built into the price of gasoline. So the driver does not take it into consideration when starting up his or her car. A price on carbon would add that missing cost to the price of the fuel. The higher price would reflect societal costs and would give people an incentive to drive less and thus emit less carbon. So there are two primary methods for the government to establish a price for carbon. First, it can establish what is called a cap and trade system. The government under such a system can set a maximum level of acceptable carbon emissions and then issue tradable permits for quantities of carbon emissions. This allows the market for such permits to determine the price of carbon. Such a system has been used effectively in another context. In the 1990s, the federal government successfully used a cap and trade system under the Clean Air Act to reduce emissions of sulfur dioxide from coal-fired power plants, and this reduced the incidence of acid rain. Also in 2008, closer to home, Connecticut, Delaware, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York, Rhode Island, and Vermont implemented a cap and trade system called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And this initiative is intended to reduce the amount of carbon allowed from electricity producers who are required to buy a credit for every metric ton of carbon they emit. So in 2015, the initiative's cap was 91 million tons, with that cap declining by 2.5% per year from 2015 to 2020. So that's a cap and trade system. And an alternative to the cap and trade system is the government establishing a price through a tax on carbon pollution. With this approach, the state would add a surcharge on fuels that release carbon. The price of fuels would more closely reflect the costs of carbon emissions to society. By having fossil fuels reflect those societal costs, the policy would be aimed at modifying behavior, as I said before. It would provide an incentive for consumers to reduce their use of carbon-emitting fuels. Drive less, carpool, turn the thermostat down, put more insulation in the house, etc. Increasing the cost of using fossil fuels would also, importantly, make a shift to renewable energy more attractive. So high-efficiency electric heat pumps would become more cost-effective than using old fuel boilers. Electric cars would be an even better choice than a gas-powered vehicle, if those fuel-using devices have to take into account the additional costs through this carbon pollution tax. So the increased demand for electricity would spur continuing investment in the renewable energy produced within Vermont. It would increase the resources going into the clean energy economy, which is already booming in the Green Mountain State, as I think a couple of people have mentioned before. We have 19,000 Vermonters working in this sector. That's a 29% increase since 2013. And if we put a price on carbon, which leads to fuel shifting to electricity, that will help this sector continue to thrive. Also, I've heard mentioned the Vermonters do spend about $2 billion a year on fossil fuels. That comes to about $3,600 per man, woman, and child in the state that is going out of state. And we don't mine coal, we don't frack for gas, we don't drill for oil, so we'd rather have that money go towards the renewable energy that we can form in this state. So a carbon pollution tax has been successfully implemented elsewhere. It's been implemented throughout Europe. Closer to home in British Columbia, it has been implemented and has been very successful. Their economy has been doing quite well. And they have seen a significant reduction in carbon pollution. So I'm going to get into some nuts and bolts of what we have to consider for putting a price on carbon, and that not your committee anymore would be considering it, but the Energy and Technology Committee. I think Michael Yantoshka is on that, so we'll direct all these questions to him. First of all, there's a question of the cap and trade versus carbon tax, and I won't go into that too extensively. The cap and trade does have benefits in certain industries, certain sectors, but it is much more complicated to implement, and I think, from what I understand, we've been pushing more on the side of having a tax to put the price on carbon, in part because we already have a tax system in place that would allow us to more readily collect that tax, and the administration of it is much more straightforward. So looking at the carbon tax, some of the questions that will have to be answered is, first of all, what emissions should be taxed? Carbon dioxide is not the only greenhouse gas. In fact, other gases have much worse greenhouse effects. And so the question is, do we also tax those? In Vermont, though, transportation, looking at the overall greenhouse gas emissions, transportation is contributing about 44% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and heating commercial and residences with fuel is another approximately 22%. And that's mostly, we're talking about carbon dioxide. So if we focus on carbon dioxide, we're really aiming at the biggest problem that we have in Vermont. It also would be a lot less complicated as well. So that's some initial thoughts. Take those with you, Mike, when you talk about those. But I will talk about a couple of the other questions and just give you some initial ideas as well. How high is the tax rate? How high should the tax rate be to the price per ton of carbon dioxide? And scientists are able to understand what different fuels emit as far as carbon. So we know that if we put a $10 carbon tax per metric ton, that, for instance, that translates into $8.78 per gallon of gas, $10.21 per gallon of diesel and fuel oil, or $5.72 per gallon for propane. So we know how cost on the per metric ton will transfer into a cost of those fuels. But there are other factors to consider. One is estimating the social cost of carbon. And there are estimates out there. There's a model that the EPA has, if they still have it, if it hasn't been thrown out the door. But it only helps somewhat. I mean, it comes up with a societal cost of per ton of carbon from $11 to $115. So there's a lot of room in there for the legislature to consider that. There will be questions about whether to phase in the cost, every year have it go up by a certain amount and such. These are questions that need to be answered. And we can also look to what other states and countries have done. British Columbia, for instance, has a cost of $23. If you look at Europe, you can, Estonia has a $2 per ton cost versus Sweden has $130 per ton cost. But the bottom line is we want to have the cost affect behavior. I mean, and that's going to be, it's going to be a tough one to figure out, but it's a very important issue. The next question is who pays the tax, and that one's relatively straightforward. We already have gas tax in the state, and it goes upstream to distributors generally pay that. So we have that in place, and that certainly is a benefit for going with this approach. Finally, are there exemptions? Are there certain sectors in Vermont that should be exempted or should have a reduced cost? So there are other questions, including what do we do with the money that we collect? And I think I'm going to turn that over to Deanna.
Well, thank you again, everyone, for being here and for all the effort that was put in for putting this on and putting this on as one of 6 across the states. Because this is a terribly important issue, and we've heard a lot from everyone up here about the different ways that we have an economic opportunity and an imperative to make sure that our lowest income Vermonters are benefiting from what we're doing in terms of reducing our carbon impact. So I'm going to take a lot of what folks have said and kind of encapsulate it. That when we do a carbon pricing at the point of purchase, it's a little bit more expensive. And so in that, the behavioral economists, as has been said already, that we reduce our use. However, we know that we need to get places, we need to heat our houses, and so we have this tension between those two things. And when there's 2 big policy questions that we need to do, assuming that everyone in this room, at least, is an advocate for having some sort of pricing on carbon. If we just look at carbon pricing as with a tax on use, so not cap and trade, but instead looking at carbon pricing, then we need to think about what are we going to do with the money. So we have these questions of how we're going to get it, what the amount is going to be in, but very big questions around policy questions around what we will do with the money. And Karen Lafayette said multiple things about that, but I want to put it down. I'm going to use my hands to demonstrate that we have 2 choices. 1, revenue neutral, that Karen Lafayette talked about, and 2, we have that we could use that money in some way. And of course, we can do hybrids of those, but I'll break it down into those 2 things. So revenue neutral is just a different way of saying that all of the money that we collect, we return back in some way. Now, how we return that back and who we return that back can be also a wide variation. So we could return that back equally, so that every person gets the same amount, regardless of how much they spent. And we could do that in a variety of mechanisms. So we could do that through taxes, we could do that through different checks in the mail that's outside of taxes, and again, Karen Lafayette touched on both of these. We could also do it more equitably. So instead of each person gets the same amount, we have it based upon something else. We have it based upon usage, we have it based upon income, and there is a different way that we think about returning that money back. So, but whatever it is that those mechanisms, that revenue neutral means all of the money that we get collected goes back out. And one of the things that there's a little bit of crossover between the equal and equitable in the case of Vermont. In the case of most places, if you have less money, you spend less money. Now in Vermont, when we look at the energy costs for the lowest income Vermonters, and folks that are very rural, have very leaky houses, so are spending a lot on transportation, a lot on heating costs, that their energy consumption is pretty similar to our high income Vermonters because they have the money. So in Vermont, we need to think more about maybe transportation sheds. Where are people driving to? What does the housing stock look like? Because we know we have the second oldest housing stock in the nation, and in that we have very leaky houses that people have to spend a lot of money on heating and staying warm. Folks may not know this, but that cold-related deaths, are the #1 killer in Vermont, actually. That people are not able to heat their houses well enough and die from cold-related illnesses. So we have these impacts in lots of different ways that show up when we're not adequately providing for our neighbors. So we have that all money gets returned, that revenue neutral, or we use that money for something that continues to decrease our carbon usage. So again, Karen laid out multiple of these, and Martin Lalonde also laid out multiple of these. So do we use that money to put into public transportation so that we have less carbon impact because we have more people driving in using public transportation rather than individual cars? Do we use that weatherization for instead of heating the outside, you get to heat your house and you get to stay warm, which I know I always appreciate that. These different possibilities that Karen also put out of cash for clunkers, when we're changing in our cars for either higher miles per gallon or different electric rebates, making sure that, as Martin also pointed out, we have the infrastructure that goes along with those electric vehicles, and we also have the infrastructure that goes along with public transportation. Those are two very important things. Or is it money that goes to LIHEAP, or not to LIHEAP, excuse me, but to heat pumps or other technologies that reduce our energy consumption? So there are these two big possibilities in terms of policy, and then within that, there's lots of different things. One of the things I failed to mention in all the money returns, that it is a really great economic benefit for our lowest income Vermonters. So we know that the earned income tax credit is a huge poverty reduction in the nation, and particularly in Vermont. And so if there's a way for folks to get cash in their pockets who are low income, that has huge benefits for their lives in the immediate, particularly if we can do it in a way that is not just annually, but is more frequently throughout the year. And so those folks can take that money and use it to improve their lives, and that may include investing in things that reduce their individual carbon consumption, or it may not. So there's two different big policy avenues that one could do, and then we could also do overlaps. So it is always possible to mix things up, and so possible to have it partially returned to everyone and partially invested at a state level for different things to reduce our carbon consumption. And these two ways have different benefits for low-income Vermonters and different benefits for economic development. So we've heard multiple times tonight how when we invest in technology, when we invest in business that is here in Vermont that reduces our carbon consumption, we are investing in the entire state. We are investing in good jobs. We are investing in rising up people who right now don't have access to good jobs and therefore are low-income Vermonters. So we know that we can. It's a threefer really when we are looking at how we can have a price on carbon and then how we can invest that back into our community, both in jobs and in addressing our low-income Vermonters. So those are I wanted to kind of put a bow on the multiple things that people were talking about so that we really can look at these policies and see how these things land for you all and what your ideas are so that when we are continuing to move things forward, we have the input from as many people as possible. So that's what I'll say about those bits.
Thank you to our panelists, and so we're going to turn it over to get to some questions and answers from the panelists, and say clearly there's a significant focus on carbon pricing, which I can appreciate in terms of having a full and fair conversation about a policy that could be very efficient and effective and could potentially work well for the state of Vermont if crafted well and right. Because I feel like it's a policy that is potentially commensurate with the challenge. There are also other things that we need to be doing, that policymakers need to be pursuing, that the Climate Action Commission should be considering and analyzing in terms of will these diverse set of solutions actually make progress towards our climate goals, as well as continue to do what we're supportive of and we're trying to do here tonight, and I know what the governor is supportive of, which is to spur economic development and job creation, which is to set us on a path to affordability, as the governor would say, and to protect the most vulnerable. So these are principles that I think Vermonters all hold dear. How we do that matters. From my perspective, doing it, as you heard from Representative Sullivan, we're falling far short of our climate and energy goals. We've innovated a lot in the electric sector, and again, a shout out to our innovative and forward-looking utilities for helping to drive that transition, but we are falling far short of doing anything substantive in the heating and transportation sector, and that's where I think the carbon pricing, again, a fair conversation about how it could work well is really important, so I'm really glad the panel has seeded that and focused on that policy. At the same time, again, much more needs to be done. So I want to get into the facilitated question and answer segment of it. We got a lot of questions and comments that were provided to us before this evening's event from folks who RSVP'd. I'm going to read a few of these and ask our panelists to respond. I'm also going to invite anyone who has a question or a very brief comment to make such a comment and just to give a sense of who might actually want to say something or offer a comment. Just raise your hand. Okay. Excellent. And I would just say, please, when I do open it up for that, be brief and concise, because my guess is more people will want to comment or ask questions. And it is my hope to respect your time and to get us out of here, the formal presentation, no later than about 7:45, because we have an incredible set of panelists. We have really great resources in this room, you as well as other policymakers. I think that informal networking at the end of it is also beneficial. So I'm going to try to keep us focused and stay no later than a half an hour for this segment. But let me just start first with asking a question that we got offline, and then I will invite the folks who have questions to come on up and ask those questions. But here's a question. Name 3 things to improve the environment or alleviate or slow climate change that you think would receive tripartisan support. And are these on your legislative agenda, or what could businesses or low-income advocates do to put them on legislators' agenda? So 3 things to improve the environment and alleviate or slow climate change that you think could receive tripartisan support. And assuming all of our policymakers in this room are listening, or maybe you have your own ideas. So maybe the panelists, if you don't mind, taking a stab at it. 3 things that you
I'd
think.
like to hear from the audience members if they think there's 3 things that would have tripartisan support. I mean, you know, I can think of some things that I think sell well with some constituencies and some that don't, but,
What are those some things that you think? And use the mic if you
tripartisan
don't mind.
support.
Karen, use the mic if you don't mind. Bob, the green guy, thank you, Bob, for streaming this live, but he'll yell at me and yell at you too. You don't use the mic.
And what I want to say, I mean, I think one might have been Kurt McCormick's bill last year that would have held the energy efficiency standards. If the feds did away with them, we would keep them. I think that got tripartisan support, and that was an important piece of legislation. What I have to, I served all through the 90s, and then I went away for 14 years and came back. This is my 2nd term now. And I've unfortunately seen a real change even in the Vermont legislature that it's unfortunate that there's less of that working together that there used to be. And I think it's important, and I think a lot of us here on the panel certainly try to make that happen. But I'm not exactly sure how you go out and make it happen. I think you do find certain people in the Republican Party that you can work with, but there's not a whole lot that are coming on to these issues and really wanting to be a part of it. Maybe others have different views, but that's my thought.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that tinkering is not going to be the answer, and there might be some feel-good policies that don't do a whole lot that could get tripartisan support. I'm hoping that, and I truly respect folks in all the parties and a lot of smart people there. I'm hoping that the wisdom of this approach will start catching on. You know, we have a ways to go, and I think that's in part why one of the reasons that we're focusing on the economics of this, on the business opportunity of this, is to try to show that it's a win-win in taking this approach. I know there was another question, and I saw that talked about, well, what about the moral implications of this? Shouldn't we be doing this for moral reasons? And absolutely, and I think the folks who would vote for putting a price on carbon for that purpose, we already have. And it's a matter of showing other rationales, other reasons to support this. So I'm not giving up hope yet that we can't get tripartisan support for pricing carbon. So
I think that Deanna said it when she said that this could be a threefer. And I think that's what it takes. I think the moral imperative sells really well in Vermont, sells especially well in Montpelier. But I think if you can put forth a well thought out plan that creates jobs, stimulates the Vermont economy, and also takes care to not overburden certain populations, and then does the ultimate goal that we're trying to achieve is reduce carbon emissions. I think that's a threefer, and I think that people can come around to that. Sometimes takes a number of years. I mean, we're dealing with education financing again, and that took many, many years to affect, to do a major change like that, to bring about equity and that type of thing. And we're dealing with it again, but it takes patience, and but I think you've seen some movement in that area with the governor's climate committee and with a legislature that's willing to attempt this and has kept it up for the past 3-4 years on coming up with something that'll work. So I think it can be done.
Okay. Let me read one more question, and then we can turn it to an audience question. We'll go back and forth. I read that Vermont enabled $500,000 last year to support the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association training and recruiting people to work in that sector. Can we do the same or more to support, intentionally support the clean energy sector? This is not only policymakers. Sue?
I'd be in favor of not subsidizing anything in the fossil fuel industry. I mean, it's a dying industry, and I've even talked to people in that field. Like, start thinking of yourselves as energy companies rather than, fuel dealers, fossil fuel dealers. Become a part of the transition. Lots of industries transition from where they were to a brighter future. And, kind of get on the bandwagon. Don't be clinging on to something that's not going to be around. The other thing I just wanted to mention regarding the previous question was that Dick McCormick, who co-chairs the Climate Solutions Caucus with me, he and I went in to talk to the governor about what can we really work on together, because we really, thought, he started this commission, and the governor said, and we could understand it, that he wanted to wait to get the report back from the hearings that are happening around the state and try to figure out what the goals would be and what we can work on together. And we thought that was reasonable. And then it wasn't all that much time later where he posted on Facebook that he was absolutely opposed to a carbon tax, when a lot of these people at these hearings are saying that they really want a carbon tax. So it really, I just encourage all this pressure from the outside, because I really think that that's going to change the debate.
Yeah, and I was going to follow up with what you said earlier in terms of folks putting pressure on your electeds, and really connecting with other people that to also put pressure on their electeds. That we have elected representatives that don't believe that climate change is real. Like, we have those people that stand up on the floor and are saying that. And so we need people to put pressure on their electeds, because it's a whole spectrum. So even if the person that you elected, you feel like, yes, they would be behind a carbon pricing in one way or another, having the support of being able to say, my constituents are calling me. I'm doing this because my constituents want this. It's really helpful for us to move the conversation forward. And then really being aware that on the far end of folks that are climate change deniers need to not have that job anymore. And so what is it that we can do to also look at who else we can elect and who else we can support in terms of running in districts that right now have those folks.
Chris, did I see you have something on the workforce development?
Yeah, just briefly building on Mary's point, which I think is an incredibly important insight, is this idea of, what are these companies' roles in our future, right? And there's sort of two approaches. If you look at the coal industry, right, that industry is going away, and they didn't plan for the future. So there's sort of two models here, right? There's the kind of Netflix versus Blockbuster. And Blockbuster saw themselves as not an entertainment company, but a company that ran stores that rented first VHS tapes and then CDs, right? And Blockbuster's no longer around. And Netflix saw themselves as an entertainment company. So they innovated, they brought new innovations to market, and they're now one of the most successful technology companies on the planet. So that's the critical insight. Are you a fuel dealer, or are you in the business of providing energy to Vermonters? And I think that, the winners and losers will be the one that have the vision to understand this transition is happening, and digging in one's heels is not a strategy.
Okay, let's take a question from the audience, and saw your hand back here. Unfortunately, we don't have any roving microphones, so do you have a booming voice?
Just repeat the question as well.
I can repeat the question as well.
Okay. One of the things that has not been mentioned as far as transportation goes is airlines. Airlines and the military planes that roar over Burlington. are something that we have to consider. They cause a lot of pollution, noise pollution included. I don't think it's a healthy thing for our country or for the people who live here. And I think that should be part of the whole transportation idea. We have to include the airlines and the military planes. And before I came here, I lived in Maine on the coast. And there are a lot of people in the peace movement trying to get Bath Iron Works to stop building destroyers and change into the energy efficient model of something and build windmills or something else. So that's something that we can consider too. I can't bear the noise of those planes now, and they say the next ones coming in are even worse. That's not helping for people, period. That is really unhealthy. So there's that whole aspect too that just hasn't been part of the conversation.
Okay, thank you. So the question is, anyone on the panel want to tackle what do we do about airlines and the military air force?
The only thing I want to say that I completely agree with you, and with those issues, I am a citizen who talks to my congressional delegation about them. They're not ones that come before the legislature, but they are incredibly important and ones that I think we all need to be speaking loudly about.
That's the thing, we have to talk about it.
Yes.
So that it becomes a part of the conversation, because it hasn't been. Not in the context of what we're talking about tonight.
Okay, thank you. Another question?
Before the meeting began, I took a few minutes to read these three environmental reports from the NRC, and I just want to say that the word farm doesn't appear in any one of these brochures. It only appears one time. Actually, one time it talks about current use, which was cobbled together with Farm Bureau as a partner. I'm going to read a paragraph or just a short sentence from a letter that I sent to Darren Springer.
That's going to be brief, very brief.
I'm going to be brief.
Okay, thank you.
Conventional Vermont dairy is the second largest contributor to global greenhouse gases, ahead of the entire transportation sector and behind only electrical and heat generation. I would strongly recommend that VNRC fill this lacuna, that's a Latin word for blind spot, in its programs and address conventional dairy, which, by the way, is also responsible for roughly half the pollution in Lake Champlain.
Thank you, James. And I would just say that we are working on with many diverse partners on regenerative ag, which is I haven't quite got the synthesis yet from the 4 public scoping sessions that the Vermont Climate Action Commission hosted across the state, but I believe, if my understanding is correct, that the #1 recommendation that people made at those forums was to put a price on carbon pollution, and the second was to focus on opportunities for regenerative ag as a sort of multi-win, climate, clean water, doing right by our farmers solution. So I would say that it's not a blind spot, it's something that we are looking at, but not being on the panel myself, you and I can take this conversation offline. But it's a really good climate solution, which is doing something about and working with our farming sector. So panelists want to?
The only thing I wanted to, if you haven't read the book Cows Save the Planet, it's a really fascinating book. And I learned a lot about, it's amazing how much we can sequester the carbon into the soils with good land management and good farming practices. So along with renewable energy and cleaning up emissions like that sequestering back into the soil is something we need to be working on as well.
And I guess, as the face of the dairy industry on the panel, it is true that this is both currently a big part of the problem, and it is also an incredible opportunity. And I think we at Ben & Jerry's have done a lot of work over the years in our dairy supply chain. I think it's hard to look at that work and say that it is, matches the scale of the problem. I think we understand that that's true, and I also think we understand that broadly speaking, the sort of conventional dairy industry is not performing particularly well for the planet, nor the rural economy. So I think it is a system that's not functioning particularly well now, but has an enormous opportunity to be both a driver of rural economies and also in a way that produces much better environmental results. It's regenerative as opposed to destroying the land.
And the other thing that I'd like to add is looking at exemptions or not exemptions to having carbon pricing, and that when we think about the different policies that we want to do of carbon neutral or the money returning, also in there is does everyone have to pay? And if everyone has to pay, then how do things kind of get back? Because again, you can also turn money back either equally or equitably, or you can do it in different programs. So I think one of the things that I certainly am sensitive to is if we start exempting certain people or certain industries, then it makes things a lot more complicated, and it makes things a lot more difficult to hold people accountable and to reduce our carbon usage. And if we have, and people frequently want exemptions for different groups. So one way that we can still tackle having an equitable return is that there's a different way of the money returning rather than exemptions at the front end, and the dairy industry, and specifically in farms overall, would be captured underneath a carbon pricing plan that was in terms of fuel dealers. So we have that system in place right now that we can add an additional fee on top of fuel dealers, and how that money is collected. So we already have that mechanism in place, and maintaining that mechanism can really help us capture the various ways that we're having carbon in the state.
I want to just draw attention to a fossil fuel use that I recently have discovered is something that is relatively significant that we see every day, but haven't really thought about very much, and that is the use of lawnmowers. And I was surprised to find out that commercial lawnmowers burn about 1 gallon to 1.5 gallons an hour, and our community was using one. And I found a lawnmower online, commercial lawnmower, that is all electric and is using lithium-ion battery technology. And I've actually become the rep, and I just came from Dartmouth today that was just demoing this, and I'm bringing around to demoing it. And I just have some numbers here, just for people to keep in mind. Assuming a 1 gallon to 1.5 gallons an hour per mower.
Let me just ask you to be very brief, because we can't hear you here either. So.
Most of these mowers are running about 35 hours a week for 26 weeks. It's about 1,000 gallons per commercial lawnmower. This is just commercial lawnmowers. These aren't the homeowner versions. All your universities, public works departments. So I'm assuming, I don't know, but let's just say there's 1,000 of these commercial mowers in Vermont. That's 1 million gallons of fuel a year. That's 20 million pounds of CO2, 10,000 tons. And so I'm in the process of talking to cities and universities, and there's some receptivity. I'm talking to the electric utilities to create an incentive. Hopefully that's going to be introduced or developed further this winter. But just something for people to keep in mind when they see these mowers, and they're going to hopefully start seeing electric versions of these. Right now there's 3 companies, 2 in Chittenden County and 1 in Middlebury and Addison.
Well, as we're
It's a great ad.
It's a great idea. We are keeping, as I said before, a list of the solutions, that people think the state of Vermont should be pursuing. So that is an important one.
Can I just make one comment? While you're at the lawnmower discussion, could you also add the leaf blowers?
Yeah, actually, there's an organization called the American Green Zone Alliance and also Quiet Communities. And all over the country, there are these efforts to transition away, and leaf blowers are one of those.
Okay.
I personally have one. I just bought a chainsaw.
Okay, we're totally off topic.
Sorry, yeah, we need to sort of move on and keep the, just to ask you, just because we have a lot to cover and many more questions that were submitted earlier, to the best of your ability, be extremely brief, and remember that we're trying to capture the ideas on the solutions, so please keep focused. Way back there, well, I'm gonna start with Beth, and then I'm gonna go back to you, Rick. Okay, Brevity.
Okay, I'm supportive of the carbon tax. I'm supportive of public transportation, but I don't think they're going to be effective if we don't do something about land use. And we're still developing jobs in areas where there's no bus service. We're developing retail and strip development locations. I mean, look at where your Ben & Jerry's plants are located. One's on Route 100 in Waterbury. One is not in a center. It's on a campus. You look at Tilly Drive, where people have to go for medical services. When that was built, I don't know if they have bus service now, but as a year ago, they did not. They do now, good. But they put endocrinology and orthopedics out in a place with no bus service. I mean, what are we thinking when we plan? We've got to get these to work together. And there was recently a Dollar General store that was located on a highway outside of Virgins when there's a lot of vacant land in Virgins. So that demands that people pretty much take a car to get there. So if we're going to solve 44% of energy consumption is from transportation, if I remember that, we have to solve the land use problem at the same time. Density is not accepted everywhere in this state at all, and it's still a big issue.
Thank you. Does anyone on the panel want to respond, or just it's a good point, good idea. Sir, in the back, you.
To piggyback on what she said, we're digging a hole, we're in a hole with regard to our residents, our buildings, still being heated by fossil fuels, and our zoning still does not prohibit this thing from continuing and making our problems worse. Developers are still allowed to build buildings fueled by fossil fuels instead of heat pumps. And this is something that we could stop right now. I think we need to go back to our communities and talk to our planning commissions and address this issue. Stop allowing buildings to be built that are fueled by fossil fuels.
I'm wondering if that's a question for our policymakers or to Karen or someone.
I didn't hear.
And he was asking about how we can incent or prohibit the building of homes and businesses that just support fossil fuels instead of incenting clean energy, more efficient homes, that sort of thing. Is it, just this question, I guess, to turn it into a question, it's a good idea of capturing. Are there any policies, is it state level code?
Well, I mean, we do it for ADA and that type of thing, if there's new buildings or if you're renovating or that type of thing. I mean, I suppose it would go to your energy standards and that type of thing. When you build new, there's certain restrictions or certain, or incentives to do it, the best way, best practices, but.
Yes, so the question is if the state has energy codes, and the state does, and also there's some murmurings about local planning commissions and local zoning, and that while we have state level codes, and particularly state level codes around energy, that a lot of our building codes are local specific, and so as a state we're getting more unified in terms of local, in terms of mandating the existence of local planning commissions, and there's still a lot of power at the local level, which has a plus and minuses. So again, if we work locally, that there are some amazing opportunities at very small communities to say, this is the standards that we want, and then also at the state level of seeing where we can move into the energy standards that we already have. So in a similar way that we look at the federal government, and there are different opportunities at the federal than at the state level, there's also different opportunities at the local level versus the state level.
We've got a lot of questions, so I'm asking people to be brief. Betsy and then back to Lucy.
So I am supportive of carbon pricing, and I think this is our coming into the third year now for the Energy Independent Vermont campaign. So I think this will be directed mainly to Mary and to Joey as a member of the Governor's Climate Action Commission. I'm just wondering, ideas you have of what we need to do to bring more legislators on board so that it can actually happen this year. And Mary spoke of the governor's Facebook post, and how can we change the governor's mind?
I go back to what I had said earlier, hound. I mean, it really, you know, as citizens, like really getting in touch with people and getting in their face and just saying, you know, that I speak for many, many people. We are supportive of this. There is pressure in the building to back away from this, and we need to just really know that, some people need to know that they're going to be actually harmed in their next election unless they do this. And that is what I think it will take to move this forward.
Keep going.
Lucy Gluck, I work for Sun Common, which is one of the many solar companies in Vermont. A couple quick personal experiences. I talk to people of all income levels every day around trying to help them get solar. And a couple of the things that are getting in the way, one is we need to have more options for community solar where people can buy into solar farms and support renewables. If you're a renter, if you can't afford to get panels right now, so that's a biggie. There's some policy limitations there. And another is, you know, what other incentives or financing can we have available for people who are stuck, you know, maybe their credit score has been too low for a little while, and we're telling them, well, call us back when you get your credit score up a little bit more. You know, we'd really like to be able to help you. And so what else can we do in Vermont to support those folks would be great. From a personal perspective, in terms of I live in Burlington and I'm going to Waterbury to work, and we have a lot of people living in Burlington and we carpool together. We do not, as far as I know, if you know where it is, there's no park and ride in Burlington. So we pull into Staples and we're going to get towed out of Staples parking lot because we can't leave a car there so that we can drive together. So I'm driving extra miles to pick somebody up here, there, and everywhere. Where's the park and ride in Burlington? The other thing is when I ride the bus and I put my bike on the bus, I'm paying $4 each way and extra time, and then getting off because the bus doesn't go by my office, so I have to ride my bike down, which I love to do, but some people can't do that. So busing, more options, less expensive would be awesome.
Way to be brief and specific. We have some other questions hanging on. I was going to go. Ron, here, and then.
We seem to have had success with regional gas, the RGGI program. What kind of policies or things can be done to make this a regional effort? We had some success with the GMO in terms of surrounding states had trigger mechanisms that says, well, if you do this, we're going to do that. Is that any possibility?
I'm part of the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, and we have a Northeast group, and we are meeting to talk about a regional effort. We know full well, I mean, the people from New Hampshire who are part of it are terrific people. It's not going to fly in New Hampshire, we know that. So, but there's very good possibility that New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and I think even Connecticut, I see Tom nodding, so I think, you know, we'll be moving forward on this issue. So we are working together. We have a meeting coming up down at the State House in Boston, I don't know, sometime before the session starts, I plan to be at. So there's lots of conversations and there are things moving forward in these legislatures.
If you don't mind, I'm going to, just because people did submit some comments, I don't want to direct this one to Karen. Something about there's waiting lists, waiting lines for low-income weatherization. So low-income earners who want to have their homes weatherized are waiting for that ability to do so. What more can we do to support low-income earners and weatherization?
Well, you know, we have tried over the course of the last number of years to increase the weatherization dollars, and we were in a pretty tight situation because fuel prices were low, and that's what was generating our revenues. So that's why we went ahead and moved at least the fossil fuel tax from a fuel gross receipts tax to a per gallon tax. So I think we don't know exactly. We just barely had a full year of that tax being implemented. So I think we'll have to see, you know, how much money that raised and whether or not we can continue along with the same thing. It all depends on, we get a small amount from the federal government. So, you know, we had built up capacity before the revenues were diminished, and you know, we certainly can do that again. But we would love to have people not be on, and there are some areas, some regions that can accommodate now with the new revenue system can do the low income weatherization. But you know, that's low income weatherization is a real win-win situation all the way around. So the more investment we can make in that, and it's jobs, it's good paying jobs, and it teaches people a trade. And there's also a lot of other things that happen in low income weatherization where people go into other people's homes and they can tell them how to save on energy and certain things, and they can give them access to other services, that type of thing. So it's a good program with respect to that. So if some of the benefit of one of the original proposals of carbon pricing allowed for the first $6 million or something to go into low income weatherization, that's always a plus when you can do proven programs like that.
Thank you. And just because we're running out of time, I wanted to just take 2 other brief questions and leave just a little bit of, you had your hand up for a while back here, sir. Did you get your question answered? Did I just, or no? Okay, moving on.
So I agree. I think the carbon tax is a wonderful idea. I think we should use the money to weatherize, starting with the very poorest people. And then once we've got all those weatherized, move up the income chain. We should use the money to put up solar and wind all over the state, and then provide free trains and buses for everyone as well.
Brief and specific. Okay, you have a question here?
Yeah, just along the lines of the park and ride, you know, how about I used to try to park in that lot so I could ride my bike into town, and yeah, now they're towing. I mean, we have this huge parking lot that we can use. So in terms of biking infrastructure, which would help out people at all levels of income, there's a lot we can do, just, you know, like that is low cost but creative. Yeah, like parking rides and the new protected lane that's just up in Burlington. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff we can do to help out folks and make bicycling safer.
Excellent points. All right, because you're so brief, this gentleman has a pressing question.
Okay. I like the idea of the ramp for the LIHEAP for the Energy Systems Program, and what I think we need as far as the intersection of like solar, electricity, and heat is we need a carve out in the net metering rates for community solar projects that benefit the energy assistance agencies. There's someone I've been in touch with who's created projects like this in Minnesota, trying to create some in Vermont, where the net metering credits benefit those assistance agencies, and then those benefits get passed on to the consumers of the relief. And if we have a ramp, not a steps, but ramp, it's going to help erase some of the resentment for people who are at the bottom of the cliff, for those who are still on top of the cliff, which I think is part of our divisive dialogue in the country right now.
And we already have a way to deliver. I mean, in the state of Vermont, we have electrical energy affordability. We have a plan that reduces it for certain incomes, and we also have that for for natural gas as well, so, we have the basis for those types of programs to be reducing people's energy costs on that end rate from the providers.
Yeah, if we could.
And we can make that more significant.
Yeah, if we could adjust the net metering rates for those kind of projects, it would make it more possible.
Anyone else on the panel want to address that or speak to that? Are there any people who haven't had the opportunity? Yes, sir. Yeah.
I mean, we're about to have a sea change in the technology and markets for electric vehicles, and it's something that wouldn't have been anticipated even a couple of years ago. And I'm just wondering what the state is doing anything to really be able to take advantage about what's about to happen that'll make a major dent in our transportation sector emissions.
The only thing I wanted to mention was there is that chunk of VW's settlement money, and how that is allocated and spent, whatever, is really, really important. This is, I think, something that should jumpstart the electric vehicles, public transportation, so that we really start to cut down on the emissions from that sector, which are huge. I think the comment period is still open. And so, if you want to send in comments, I think to the Agency of Natural Resources, they will be received. But it's I think it's like $18 million or something. For Vermont, that's a significant amount of money.
And I'm going to cut it off quickly here, but Representative?
Yeah, just speaking to that VW settlement money. It's $18 million from the federal lawsuit, and there's another state lawsuit that's going to add another $4 million. So there are certain criteria that the Department of Environmental Conservation has to state how the money is going to be spent. But about 10% of that can be allocated toward enhancing the electric vehicle infrastructure. So getting charging stations more present throughout the state, so you don't have to go around searching for them. So we are going to be working on that.
Yeah, and it really should not be used for natural gas vehicles. I know that I think it can be used according to some of the things, but that's not the direction we should be going in.
Okay, are there any closing comments from our amazing panelists? Anything you want to say in closing or epiphanies?
Well, I wanted to highlight an opportunity that we haven't talked about in terms of gender equality. And when we look at the economic opportunity for having more trades opportunities in Vermont, we also have an opportunity to increase women getting more money. So the trades has, while there's less than 10% of women in the trades, that the income disparity between men and women in the trades is very low. So it's a very good job opportunities for women. And when we know overall nationally and in Vermont that women make a lot less than men do, and that has long-term consequences for individuals and for us as a state. And so when we're looking at increasing economic opportunity by increasing good paying jobs, by keeping energy jobs here and increasing those jobs here, we're also looking at an opportunity to increase the economic lives of women and therefore the rest of us, all of us, not just those of us who are women. So wanted to also put that plug out there that that it has so many different ways that this can benefit us.
Anyone else on the panel want to close?
Just, I think there's just so many opportunities with this. We have 4,000 families in the state of Vermont that live on reach up and are trying to find work, and they're required to work. And right now I think the state of Vermont assists about 60 families in getting some kind of transportation in cars. And I don't know what those vehicles are like. I'm sure that they're very good programs, but even something like that, if we could increase the availability of energy efficient vehicles to that population who could then find a job and get to work from the most rural areas, that would be a tremendous thing to do.
Anyone else? Closing thoughts on our panel?
Thank you.
Well, I just want to wrap it up, and again, just give you a few moments or minutes to linger with some of the amazing people that are in this room. There are more questions and good ideas that we've captured tonight, but the long and short of it is I just want to say from BDSR's perspective and BNRC's perspective, and I think, those of us who came tonight probably share this, that there's clearly an urgent need to act on climate. And if we work together, we're a small state, we have a citizen-led legislature, we have innovative utilities, we've got business innovation, we have a need to bring all people into the opportunity, women, low-income earners. So I'm just optimistic that there's, some good intention and some goodwill and good faith and opportunity for a fair conversation, again, which is one of the reasons we want to have this conversation, that we can really get stuff done. So I would beseech you two different things. Follow the work of the Governor's Climate Action Commission, weigh in with your most specific thoughts and your priorities that you'd like to see the Governor's Commission pursue. And just to let you know that the Governor has charged the Commission with coming up with short-term solutions. So before January 1st of 2018, the Governor's asked the Commission to come up with at least 3, potentially more, things that he can work with the legislature and others on to pursue in the short term. Over the course of the longer term, to come up with bigger ideas, potentially bigger levers, carbon pricing or others, that could really move the needle and focus our efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and grow jobs and opportunity for everyone. So I would say that's an important venue for people to be watching and weighing in on and ensure that you're making your voice heard. So again, one of the reasons having this panel is to focus on the benefits and the opportunity of doing something about climate change, not just the costs and the consequence. We have true innovators in this state, and I feel like if we're all in it together, we can really make progress. So thanks so much again for coming, lending your time, spend some time here talking to the amazing people who have come, Treasurer Pierce, Christine Hallquist, Vermont Electric Cooperative, I'm bumbling. Yes. We have amazing people in this room, so linger a little longer. We've got state reps in this incredible panel, so thank you all again for coming. So look forward to working with you.